The Shadow in the Attic. It had been 2 weeks since Paul and Emily moved into the old Victorian house on Sycamore Street. They had fallen in love with its creaky charm, the grand staircase, and the attic, a space Paul imagined turning into his home office. On a cool Saturday afternoon, Paul decided it was time to explore the attic and begin his project. He pulled down the ladder and climbed up, flashlight in hand. The attic was larger than he expected, filled with forgotten boxes and the smell of aged wood. Dust motes danced in the beam of his flashlight as he scanned the space. The floor creaked underfoot as he moved toward an old chest in the corner. He knelt to open it, unaware of the dark shadow shifting along the rafters behind him. A soft skittering noise made Paul pause. He looked around, his flashlight revealing nothing but the aged beams and cobwebs. With a shrug, he turned his attention back to the chest, which groaned as it opened. Inside were dusty quilts, a few picture frames, and what looked like a journal. He picked up the journal, blowing off the dust, and suddenly felt a sensation, like a whisper, across his neck. Paul swatted the air, assuming it was a draft or perhaps a stray cobweb, but the feeling lingered. He turned the flashlight upward, and his heart skipped a beat. Just above his head, perched silently on a rafter, was a spider, its body larger than his fist, legs impossibly long, with a shiny, black exoskeleton that reflected the light. Its eyes, dozens of them, seemed to glisten as they locked onto Paul. Paul stumbled backward, his pulse quickening. He had always hated spiders, but this one was unlike anything he had ever seen. It moved, not quickly, but with deliberate precision, following him as he backed away. Its body made a faint clicking sound with each step, a grotesque symphony of legs against the wooden beam. Emily's voice called from below. "Paul? Everything okay up there?" He opened his mouth to respond, but the spider dropped from the rafter, landing with a muted thud between him and the attic entrance. Paul felt his breath catch in his throat. The spider's body seemed to pulse, its legs shifting in an almost hypnotic rhythm. It began to move toward him, slow but unyielding. Paul's instincts kicked in. He grabbed a nearby broom, swinging it wildly. The spider dodged, its movements almost intelligent, as if it anticipated his every action. It lunged, and Paul fell backward, the broom slipping from his grasp. He could see the creature more clearly now, its mandibles clicking, venom dripping from their tips. He scrambled to his feet, his back against the far wall. The spider advanced, its eyes fixed on him, unblinking. Paul could feel his fear turning into something primal, a desperate need to escape. He reached for a box, throwing it at the creature. It burst open, and for a moment, Paul thought he had stunned it. But the spider only hesitated, its eyes narrowing, as if irritated by his resistance. Suddenly, Emily's footsteps echoed on the ladder. "Paul? I'm coming up." "No," he shouted, his voice cracking. "Stay down." But it was too late. Emily's head appeared through the attic opening, her eyes widening as she took in the scene. Paul cornered, the monstrous spider between them. Without thinking, she grabbed a flashlight from the floor and shone it directly at the spider. The creature hissed, its legs flailing as it retreated into the shadows. Paul wasted no time. He lunged for Emily, pulling her down the ladder with him. They tumbled to the floor below, breathless and shaken. Paul slammed the attic door shut, his heart pounding in his chest. They could hear it, the skittering, moving across the attic floor, a reminder that it was still there, lurking. Emily looked at Paul, her face pale. "What was that thing?" Paul shook his head, his eyes still fixed on the ceiling. "I don't know. But we're not going back up there." That night, as they lay in bed, Paul couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house, every shift in the shadows made his skin crawl. He knew the spider was still up there, waiting. And in the silence of the night, he heard it again, the soft, deliberate skittering, as if it was searching for a way out. The following morning, Paul and Emily sat in the kitchen, their eyes bloodshot from a night of restless sleep. The skittering noises had persisted through the early hours, stopping only when dawn broke. Paul stared at his coffee, his mind replaying the scene in the attic over and over. "We need to do something," Emily said, her voice barely a whisper. "We can't just leave it up there." Paul nodded, though he had no idea what they could do. "Maybe we could call an exterminator. Tell them there's something big in the attic." Emily's eyes were wide. "Do you think they'd believe us?" "That thing wasn't just a spider, Paul. It was." She trailed off, shivering at the memory. Paul knew she was right. The creature was unlike anything he had ever seen, something beyond the realm of a normal spider. He stood up, pacing the kitchen. "I'll go into town, find someone. Maybe there's a specialist who deals with, I don't know, exotic pests." Emily nodded, her hands trembling as she sipped her coffee. "Just be careful." Paul left the house, the morning sun doing little to ease his anxiety. He drove into town, his thoughts consumed by the creature in the attic. He stopped at a small hardware store, hoping to find something, anything, that might help. As he browsed the aisles, an older man behind the counter watched him curiously. "You look like you've seen a ghost," the man said, his voice gruff but not unkind. Paul hesitated, then approached the counter. "Not a ghost," he said, his voice low. "A spider. A really big one." The man's expression changed, his eyes narrowing. "How big are we talking?" Paul swallowed. "Bigger than my fist." Its legs were long, and it moved like it knew what it was doing. The man nodded slowly, as if Paul had just confirmed something he already knew. "You're not the first to come in here talking about a spider like that," he said. "There've been others. Folks around here call it the shadow crawler." Paul felt a chill run down his spine. "The shadow crawler? What is it?" The man shrugged. "No one really knows. Some say it's been here as long as the town itself. Shows up every few years, usually in one of the old houses. People who see it, well, they're never quite the same." Paul's mouth went dry. "How do I get rid of it?" The man reached under the counter, pulling out a small vial filled with a dark liquid. "This might help. It's a mixture of chemicals and herbs. You spray it where the spider's been, and it should drive it away. But be careful. The shadow crawler doesn't like being cornered." Paul took the vial, his hands trembling. "Thank you." The man nodded. "Good luck, son. And remember, it's not just a spider. It's something else, something that shouldn't be here." When Paul returned home, Emily was waiting by the door, her face pale with worry. He held up the vial, his expression grim. "The guy at the store called it the shadow crawler. He said this might help." Emily took a deep breath, nodding. "Let's do it." They climbed the stairs to the attic, their footsteps slow and deliberate. Paul pulled down the ladder, the creaking sound echoing through the house. He looked at Emily, her face tense. "Stay here," he said. "If anything happens, close the attic door and get out of the house." Emily nodded, her eyes wide with fear. Paul climbed up the ladder, the vial clutched tightly in his hand. The attic was dark, the air thick with the smell of aged wood and dust. He could hear it, the soft skittering, coming from the far corner. Paul raised the flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness. The spider was there, its body half hidden in the shadows. It watched him, its eyes glistening in the light. Paul could feel his heart pounding, his breath coming in short gasps. He uncapped the vial, the pungent smell of the liquid filling the air. The spider hissed, its legs twitching as if it sensed what was coming. Paul took a step forward, his hand shaking as he sprayed the liquid toward the creature. The reaction was immediate. The spider shrieked, a high-pitched, almost human sound that made Paul's blood run cold. It scuttled backward, its body convulsing as the liquid hit it. Paul kept spraying, his heart racing as the creature retreated, its legs flailing wildly. Suddenly, the spider lunged, its body moving with a speed Paul hadn't expected. He stumbled backward, the vial slipping from his grasp and shattering on the floor. The spider was on him, its legs wrapping around his arm, its mandibles clicking inches from his face. Paul screamed, his free hand grabbing a piece of broken wood from the floor. He swung it with all his strength, the jagged edge striking the spider's body. The creature let out another shriek, its grip loosening as it fell to the floor, twitching. Paul didn't wait. He scrambled to his feet, kicking the spider away from him. It lay on the floor, its body convulsing, the dark liquid seeping into its exoskeleton. Paul grabbed the flashlight, his breath coming in ragged gasps as he watched the creature's movements slow, then finally stop. He climbed down the ladder, his body shaking. Emily was there, her eyes wide with fear. Is it dead?" Paul nodded, his voice barely a whisper. "I think so." Emily pulled him into a tight embrace, her body trembling against his. "Let's get out of here," she said, her voice breaking. "I don't want to stay in this house another minute." They left that night, packing only what they could fit in their car. As they drove away, Paul looked back at the house, the attic window dark and silent. He knew they had made the right decision. Whatever the shadow crawler was, it didn't belong in their lives. But as they drove down the empty road, Paul couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. The memory of the spider's eyes, watching him with an intelligence that felt almost human, haunted him. And in the quiet of the night, he thought he heard it again, the soft, deliberate skittering, somewhere in the distance, following them.